So let me ask you the first question. We'll just start this off. I think you're an amazing storyteller. And I try to study your posts, and I think the way you share your posts on LinkedIn is probably a very similar way that you communicate with prospects or potential customers. And so let's say an account executive is demonstrating their product, they're on a demo. What would you say tactically they can do to like be better at storytelling? Is there a framework for storytelling?
I think it makes sense to step back a little bit and talk about why storytelling matters. And I guess the best way to do that is to actually tell a story.
Okay.
So imagine for a second that you are making a cold call, someone that you don't know. The traditional sales approach would sound something like this. Hey, Moore, uh, my name is Josh. We're working with several triathletes, helping them be way more efficient when they train so they don't have to spend 20 hours a week training. And the purpose of my call was to get on your calendar so I can show you a little bit more about how we do that. How's Thursday or Friday? Or it might sound like this. Hi, my name is James. I'm with Captivate IQ, and we've developed a process that allows you to automate your commission payouts twice as fast with a ROI that's twice as quick as all competitive solutions. The reason why I was calling is to get on your calendar. So these are traditional cold call scripts. They're very stiff. They're very fact-based, and they don't do anything to make the prospect feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the feeling part is the important part because people are very rarely persuaded by facts and stats. And everyone uses facts and stats, so they don't really move you. The idea here is to activate the part of the brain that makes someone feel something. By way of example, if I was watching an infomercial, they don't persuade with facts and stats. They don't say this blade is 30% sharper than the competitive blades. What they do is they put you in a kitchen with a person and a knife that's trying to slice a tomato with a dull knife. And as they're slicing the tomato with the dull knife, it splats all over their white apron. That is a visceral image that's burned into your brain that makes you feel very differently than someone talking at you. So when you talk at people, they go into a sleep-induced coma, very much like Ben Stein of Ferris Bueller fame,
Mm-hmm.
Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. So the idea here is, can we create scripting and messaging and talk to people so that we actually help them create a mental movie in their head about what we're talking about, what we want to explain? And so that's the idea of storytelling. And it turns out that brains are wired for story. When you make people feel something and they can see it in their head, and you can also make them smile, you're much more likely to have them lean forward because you're now a red X in a sea of white circle sales messages. And yet the traditional approach is we got to turn on our sales voice and we got to do our value proposition and we got to do just the facts. And what ends up happening is people aren't moved by that. So you're the same and people, go to sleep. And I'll give you an example. And I like to do this by showing you what it might look like before and what it might look like after with a story. So here's a before version. We'll do one for the triathlon example. So a triathlon coach. One of the problems that Ironman athletes have is that when they're training for an Ironman, they have to spend about 20 to 25 hours a week training. It's a big endeavor. Now, that's not a problem if you're 25 and you don't have a family and kids. But if you do have a family and kids and you work, it can put a strain on your marriage. And it can also put a strain on your family because you're eating at like 4 o'clock. You're sleeping on Sundays, and it can take a toll. So the traditional sales approach, if I was selling a program that allowed you to train for 10 hours a week instead of 20, while also helping you start confidently and finish strong, would be this. This is a traditional white circle sales approach. Hey, Moore, we're working with several triathletes, and we're helping them become more efficient training so that they don't have to spend 20 hours a week training. Our program helps you reduce that time by 2x. A reason I'm calling is to schedule some time to tell you a little bit about it. You may have some different ways to do it and say it, but it's really a fact-based, stat-based message. If we switch that to storytelling, we might say something like this. So Josh, you know how it's like Saturday and Sunday and you just spent 9 hours on your bike. You come home and your family isn't there because you've been training so long. We call that divorce by triathlon. With us, you train for 10 hours a week so you can get your Sundays back. Just out of curiosity, how has your training been going? How are you balancing work and family life with training? See, that's a very different approach, because what I'm doing is I'm putting them in the situation and I'm helping them imagining what it's like. And any triathlete can relate to that when they spend Saturdays and Sundays on a bike and they come home and their family's not there and they're going to sleep at 4 o'clock. All right, here's another example for a service called phone ready leads. So a problem that SDRs have when they cold call is they'll make 50 dials. And even if they have direct dials, they'll maybe connect 1 or 2 connects, maybe 1 or 2 live conversations. Traditional approach would be, we've developed a process that allows your SDRs to connect 25% more with an ROI payback in 2 years or less. Call them to get on your calendar, right? Some kind of fact-based message. If we were to tell a story, we would say something like this. So John, you know how your SDRs, they make like 50 calls, and even if they have direct dials, maybe they get 1 or 2 live conversations. We call that less odds than playing the slot machine in Vegas. With phone ready leads, your reps make 50 dials and they have 8 to 12 conversations. How are your connect rates today? Right. So it's very different. One of them makes you feel something. I even noticed you kind of smiled just a little bit, even though we're kind of role playing this. That's the idea. You got to make people feel something on the call. And I use a lot of metaphors, like for Captivate IQ. So you know how, many of the, you know how you're doing like commission statements for everyone, and it's manual process. You're copying Google Sheets into Excel. It's like sipping peanut butter through a straw. It takes that long, right? Like these metaphors, they hit different. So I use a lot of metaphors and storytelling, and I'm constantly collecting these metaphors, and I'm figuring out how to weave those into cold calling and even, demos.
Yeah. So as you're role playing that, I was taking a bunch of notes here and like trying to like put a framework around it. So the before, if someone doesn't know how to tell a story, usually it sounds like they're leading with the what and then the why. So they'll say something like, "This is what we do," similar to like the Simon Sinek approach. These are the features that we have. It's all the what. When you were then role playing the storytelling version of it, a couple of things stood out to me. The first thing was the way you started the story. So you were using like, imagine for a second, you know how, which immediately got me to engage. It was a statement that got me involved. The second thing that I noticed that you did, and let me know if I'm like wrong here, was you then started with a problem, a very specific problem that only somebody that knows the buyer persona would know. And then you would maybe pour a little salt on that wound on that problem, the impact of that problem. And then you would present the solution. It sounds like, I don't know if you've ever read The Story Brand, but there's a very similar framework that's really powerful.
I'm not familiar with that, but that's exactly what it is. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get someone to relive it.
Yeah.
And we're trying to join, as Robert Collier said, a famous copywriter, we're trying to join the conversation already happening in their head. And you're exactly right. The crispier you are, the more you hit. Yeah, so you want to use the customer's lingo and language. I was at a car show with a good friend of mine a while back. I'm not a car person, but you could tell he talked car. And he attracted other people. And as soon as people talked to me, they knew within about 2 seconds that I'm not a car person because I couldn't speak the lingo, right? So the idea is you want to be able to lift customer quotes from testimonials or case studies. I have this thing that I work with companies on called a lingo library. And we're just pasting in the thing that sucked before in the customer's language. And then we take that and we turn it into the statement. Right. So, and then I give the reps some creativity and we want to name it. So you'll notice, sipping peanut butter through a straw, divorce by triathlon, worse odds than playing the slot machine in Vegas. These are things people can sort of relate to. And they're also like a little fun, much more of a feeling than 2x your conversion rates. Like those are like white circle statements. And people are very rarely persuaded by facts and stats anyway, especially on a cold call, especially from a salesperson who has a vested interest. So what I'm suggesting here is to use storytelling and metaphors to pull people in a little bit more and have a little fun with it. I noticed when you also sort of a red X in a sea of white circle. Yeah.
Even when you speak, not when you're just role playing, when you're just talking to me, for example, you're pausing a lot, you're pacing yourself, you're talking a little bit slow, you're breathing slower, and then it just builds a little bit more drama. It lets me hang a little bit.
Well, I play guitar, and what you notice on the guitar when learning a song is it's going to sound very stiff when you first learn a song because you're getting the notes under your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have the words memorized, whatever those words are for you, you can then start working on when you want to bring your voice up. You'll notice a very subtle sort of laugh. We call that divorce by triathlon over here, right? That's all intentional, but you can't work on the subtleties of the rhythm and the volume until you actually have the notes.
The
So
fundamentals.
step one in this is sort of getting the script under your tongue. And then you can start to work on, okay, I want to pause here. I want to bring my voice up here. I want to maybe do a little laugh here. You want to be a little bit of a thespian. I mean, you are entertaining people.
Yeah.
There's nobody that doesn't want to be entertained and no one doesn't want to smile. A lot of people will tell me I'm talking to CEOs, I'm talking to these people, and I'm like, but they're just a person. Like they still watch Netflix. They go see Dave Chappelle probably. I mean, they're still people. And the alternative of that is you're just a white circle. So what I'm suggesting here is to be the red X and to weave storytelling and imagery into your talk track. So much of talk tracks lack the imagery, right? And so we can use our words to paint visual images to people. When I do this in my workshops, I have these white circles on the board, and I have them all drawn, and I say, tell me which letter stands out. And there's like 20 white circles, and then there's a red X in the middle. Everyone's like, the red X. I'm like, right. But most sales messages are like this. And because brains are pattern recognizing machines, they just ignore it. So we have to do something unexpected. When we cold call and we put someone into a role immediately, and we're using their language, divorced by triathlon, you're training for like 15 hours, you're coming home and you're eating all the Snickers bars and there's none for your kids. That's a thing that triathletes talk about in the forums. Mm-hmm. That's a very insider kind of thing. We call that divorce by triathlon over here. Like that's kind of funny. And that again is something that triathletes say. So I'm always looking for like these insider words that I can name the villain and make people like feel something. It's a visceral thing. It's a feeling, and the feelings are what matters on the call.
Do you recommend if someone's listening to this, like, all right, well, how do I then they want to build a framework for themselves and get better at storytelling? It sounds like, let me pause for a minute. I would dub you a very good copywriter then also. I think copywriters are phenomenal storytellers. And I think if you're in sales and you want to be a better storyteller, you should also study copywriting. Would you say that?
I think infomercials too, like infomercials too. Infomercials are real. I study a lot of infomercials, but the framework is simple, right? So how, right? So how, and then the job, the current way. How reps make 50 dials, but they only have 1 or 2 live conversations, even if they have direct dials. They mostly get gatekeepers. They get bad numbers or voicemails. Like that's part 1, right? How, and then the problem with how the current way is.
The current problem, yeah.
The current way they're getting the job done. And then we can name it. We think that's worse odds than a Vegas slot machine. And then what changes for the better? With phone ready leads, they make 50 dials, but they have 8 to 12 conversations instead of 2. If you don't mind me asking, how are you increasing your call to connect rate today? Are you like piling more bodies onto it? Are you guys using a parallel assisted dialer? No, then we want to ask a question to understand if this lines up with how they're doing it, right? So that's how I end the sort of framework with a question, because if we're not ending with a question and we're making statements, it's very easy for people to sort of push back. If I were to say to you the best flavored ice cream is strawberry, it's very easy for you to say, no, it's not, it's chocolate. But if I said, hey, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? It's hard for you to say, I don't like strawberry.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. So a lot of these objections happen when we're pitching at the prospect.
I wonder because
and you can even leave the phone ready leads part out. You could even say something. You can experiment with this. How they make like 50 dials. They take to 1 or 2 people. We call that divorce. We call that worse odds than playing a slot machine in Vegas. If you don't mind me asking, if I'm not intruding, how are you currently increasing your call to connect rates today? Are you guys using like more people dialing more, using like a parallel assisted dialer or something like that? Not doing much at all.
Yeah.
You could do it. You could experiment with that. But the good part is that first part. How when you automatically, I'm in the story, but it's got to be crispy. It's got to be like their language. And the best way to do that is to get things in quotes. Start collecting things in quotes about what sucked before.
Was that the jobs to be done one? I watched that on your on the B2B on the badass B2B growth guide. The jobs to be done was great.
Yeah, that's to me the best way to get this crispy language. I mean, that could be an episode in and of itself. It's a little bit of
Yeah.
a harder technique, but you interview people that bought within the last 45 days to understand the events and circumstances that happened that caused them to start looking and switch. And you just get language that you could never see any marketer write because it just comes out of the mouth of the.
Yeah.
It's just we did one of these at base camp. I was with Bob Moesta, and they were talking about, he said, like, raise your hand about something you just bought. And someone said, a reading light for my book. And he goes, okay, let's find out why he bought that. So everyone's like, to read at night, of course. But he gets on the stage and Bob does the interview with him. And it turns out that it had nothing to do with wanting to read at night. But it turns out that he had his lamp on. He was reading his book at night, and his wife wanted to go to bed. So she'd leave the bedroom, go into another room. And they were sleeping in separate bedrooms, and it was causing like a problem in their marriage. So he got this light to save the marriage. Like, it was fascinating, but you'd never get that. And that's an insight. Like that, there might be other people. Now, if you talk like that, and that resonates not with everyone, but with some people, like, you know what, I have that. My wife leaves the room. You know how you're reading your book at night? It's like 10 o'clock, you have a lamp on, and your significant other wants to go to bed. So she leaves the room and you're like sleeping alone. We call that sleep, whatever.
Yeah.
With the night light, you put it on your book. It's a really tiny light you can read, and your wife can go to sleep. Hey, Josh, I'm just curious. Do you read a lot of books at night in your bed, or is this not something you're doing today? Right. So that's kind of the idea there. But it's the same idea, which is when you want to put the person in the situation, make them feel it.
Couple of interesting thoughts. The first one is I try to read my spam folder once a week just to see if anything strikes my attention. If it does, I'm like, oh, not bad, and I'll try to dissect that. But even the good salespeople that send out cold emails, a lot of them are trying to book appointments. And it sounds like if you're using storytelling to, let's just say, send a cold email, the goal isn't to get an appointment. It's just to see if they have that problem. And if they do, then you can move forward after that. Versus like, hey, let me get 15 minutes on your call versus, hey, do you even have this problem? Am I even in the right ballpark here with you? Like, that seems like the better approach. It's more of a patient approach. And then the second thought that I had was even, and I've done this before, when you're talking to a prospect that potentially isn't a fit, or even if they are fit, whatever, they end up signing up with you or they don't sign up with you, see if you can ask them for feedback and do I don't know if my listeners know what a jobs to be done is, but like an interview, like a mini interview as to find out why they originally decided to take the meeting. I've done this with cold prospecting. So when I've landed cold clients from cold prospecting, I would ask them like, hey, I know you get a bunch of cold emails every single day. I'm curious, what about mine stood out to you that made you want to book a call? And I start interviewing them on that call, and then I'll use whatever they tell me what resonated with them, and I'll use that as a follow-up email with somebody else that I'm prospecting. But it's interesting.
Yeah, that's okay. But I think what's better is when people pay for stuff, right? Because when you pay for stuff, the problem's big enough where I want to relieve it. There's a difference between someone taking a meeting and someone paying for stuff. And so the language that you get from people that actually paid for stuff, that actually took out their wallet and paid, is very different than someone that's taking a meeting. It's just different language. And you can only get that if you interview people that have bought within the last 30 to 45 days, so the story's fresh. I like the idea that you had, and I think just in addition to that, talking to customers, it also gets back to intent, right? The idea here of all this stuff is not to assume, to your point, that you are a fit, right? To not to assume that everyone has this problem. You're sort of shining a light on what you think is a potential problem, so people can make up their own mind, and you're illuminating the consequences of a choice that perhaps they made or are going to make. So imagine I'm a tour bike guide in Colorado, and I have a restaurant on Mountain A, and the competitive restaurant is on Mountain B. Most salespeople would try to talk the person into Mountain A because my restaurant's on Mountain A, and I get paid if people eat in my restaurant. What I'm suggesting is a different approach. You say to the prospect, there are two climbs. on Left-Hand Canyon. Mountain B is a little bit more of a difficult climb. It's 16.1 miles. And the last mile is a 7% grade, but it ends at Bernard Lake. And 8 out of 10 times you visit that lake, you'll see a moose. And it is a beautiful view, and there's a restaurant up there. People that do it are exhausted. It's about a 6 or 7 hour day, so that's their day. Mountain A over here is 8 miles. The grade is about a steady 5%, so it's a little bit easier. You don't get the lake view, but it's a beautiful scenic view up top. It takes about 2 hours. There's a restaurant up there as well, but you can have the rest of the day. How would you like to proceed? You see, that's a very different approach than let me talk you into my mountain. What I'm doing is I'm shining a light on both mountains, the problem and consequence, if it may be not to them, of going up the steeper mountain, what you get and what the drawbacks are. And the same thing with Mountain A, without trying to lead anyone anywhere. And then I'm leaving it up to the other person to decide. Salespeople don't need to help anyone decide anything. If I want to buy a car, I don't need a salesperson's help deciding what car to buy. Your prospects don't need help deciding what to do. Your job is to be the arbiter of unbiased information, shine a light on the consequences, and let prospects decide what they want to do. So how would you like to proceed? Which mountain would you like to go on, if any?
But do you think some prospects do need some decision done for them? I've found that if you're talking to let's use the example of like the prospect came in, it was an inbound lead, and their buying situation is they don't use a software, they don't know what they don't know. They feel like they need to be educated, and they're intimidated, and a lot of times I've seen those prospects go with the solution that educates them more and sort of helps them make the decision. I feel like that would be a scenario where they would have to have somebody make the decision for them.
No, there's a difference between making decisions for them and letting people decide. So you said both things. Yes, of course, we want to be the arbiter of unbiased information, highlight the pros and cons of the choices, and then let them decide. I'm not deciding for them. When you decide for them, you're biased. Of course, my restaurant's the best. I have a vested interest, and prospects can pick up on that. Most buyers, when they come in, are educated. So your job is to, if they're not, close the gap. But we could also overeducate. I mean, my wife was at a Volvo dealership 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. She had been researching the XC40 Recharge for like 4 weeks. She walked in, and the salesperson said, "What brings you in today?" My wife said, "I want to look at the XC40 Recharge." And the salesperson started educating on her on the XC40 Recharge. It gets 250 miles. It's a great energy efficient car. It's got Google Play. It's got Google Android. It's got Apple Play. It's got this. It's got that. All she wanted to know was how loud it was on the road. She got so fed up with this guy that she like couldn't take it anymore. She left. Where if you're tuned into that, you might say, when someone walks in, "What brings you today?" "I'm interested in the XC40 Recharge." You might say, "Sounds like you've done your research."
Yeah.
And Jenna would have said, "Yeah, I've been reading about this thing for 4 weeks. I just want to see how noisy it is on the road." And the salesperson could say, "Let me get the keys and I'll make sure to shut my mouth during our test drive." Right? So we got to see where people are. Most of the time on an inbound lead, people are fairly educated. So you might want to say, "Sounds like you've done a lot of research before taking this call." And you might find that they have. You certainly want to know that before you go into education mode. Right? So there's a little balance there. But in either way, it's not your job to help them decide. They're going to decide. They don't need your help deciding. People can make up their own decision. They need your help with the consequences, the pros and cons, so they can decide.
But I've seen it where, and I've done it myself, where the prospect thought that, let's just say we'll use 3 different plans, silver, bronze, gold, whatever, and they thought they needed the gold plan, the highest plan ever. And based on your like experience and discovery, you realize like they'd be literally spending money for no reason, and they're convinced that they need that plan. But if I'm the salesperson trying to help them, I would say you don't need that plan. What you really need is this plan, and here's why. Like in that case, I'll sort of strong arm them a little bit if my goal is to help them. And most of the time when I've done that, or I'd say all of the times when I've done that, and they weren't educated enough about the plans that they needed, they were like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I would have spent a ton of money for no reason."
That's a great example. You're sort of highlighting the consequences of the goal plan so that they can decide what they want to do. It's still their decision at the end of the day. Some
Right.
people might still want the goal plan. So your job is to say, hey, based on what you need, here's the drawbacks and the benefits of the goal plan. And here's the benefits and the drawbacks of the bronze plan. You might be overpaying for the goal plan. How would you like to proceed?
I see.
Not you need this one. So you're educating. You're the arbiter of unbiased information. You're telling people the consequences of A and B, and then you're letting them choose what they want to do. I've also seen it where people have done that and they still want the goal plan.
Right.
Okay. So again, my job isn't to talk you into anything. My job is to be the arbiter of unbiased information, give you the consequences, show you the landscape, and let you make your own mind up. That's it.
How much do you rope, or how, you probably don't do it anymore, I would imagine. I'm making a huge assumption here, but when you initially started, I mean, you used to be a teacher before you got into sales, so I think it came naturally to you, but did you ever find yourself role-playing storytelling before the call is happening, before a presentation, before anything?
Oh my God, yeah. Tons of practice. When I do speaking engagements, when I do keynotes, when I do calls with prospects, all my stories are memorized and all my stories are done hundreds of times. I practice them.
Wow.
Over and over and over again. I mean, I'll show you like an example, something I do in a workshop here. So in a workshop, I know like 300 reps in a room, and I'll say, okay, guys, I want to test you and see how quickly and confidently you can answer these questions. So I do this. They say 9. I do this. I say 6, 21. And then everyone gets real quiet. Right now, what's the difference between this and this? The only difference is,
you've practiced this 1,000 times.
I've been taught what this is, and I've practiced it. In order to get better at something, you have to be taught what it is, and then you have to practice it. You get better at what you practice, whether that's good or bad. A lot of people have been practicing this poorly, so you respond poorly. My guitar teacher says, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So you got to know what good is, like what's the perfect push-up, and then you got to have someone watch you do the push-up and then practice the push-up. So yeah, I mean, I have, 40 of these that I've worked on for my whole sales career, and I just memorize all of them. And then so when I'm put on the spot, it's like this. Oh, that's 3 times 2.
Who do you go to? So like people obviously go to you. You have an influence. I've gone to you for advice. Who do you go to besides Chris Voss?
Yeah, Chris. I just got done meeting with him actually in Nashville. We're going to be doing some more things together, but he's been phenomenal. I know he's best known for negotiation, but I think a lot of the stuff that he teaches really gets back to making other people feel heard and understood, which is something that's not taught in sales. What's taught in sales is how do we persuade people? How do we talk people into things? How do we not take no for an answer? And so we read books like by Robert Cialdini, and there's a time for persuasion, but it's not in the beginning of the sales cycle, right? So developing this, rewiring your brain to pique curiosity and to make people feel like you get them, and you're allowing them to find their reasons for potentially changing rather than your reasons, is a complete superpower. But like this, you can't get better at that unless you've been taught it. And, Chris's workshop, he does them all over the country, teaches you the concept. And then Chris's workshop, we role played it. So they have people that come out as terrorists and we have to negotiate with them. And it's hard. Even though I know this stuff, I've been practicing it. I've only been practicing it for a year or 2. These guys at the Black Swan group, and everybody in the group was 35 or 40 of us. We all thought we were hot shots because we read the book. We did the master class. I thought I was a hot shot. They call you, they put you in the situation, dude, and you are just frozen. You're just like this, right? Because you haven't gotten the reps in, and they come out in a bandana, they're dressed up, they have a voice. You try to mirror, like you'll say, give me $50,000 or she dies or something, and I go, I'm sorry, $50,000. Didn't you fucking hear me? I said $50,000. So you're not. They throw you off your game, right? So you're trying to read the book, and then you're jarred, right? Then you're just like. So you got to get in that environment. You got to get the reps in. And Chris's workshop is a really great way to do that.
Wow. I'm thinking for anyone that's listening, they should, instead of trying to build their own cards or even, look at your calls and see what's the most frequent objection or frequent hiccup you're coming across, and then work on that versus trying to work on a role play for an objection that rarely happens, that outlier. I've seen reps do that too.
Yeah. And then just practice them. I mean, I sell these things, these are tongue tied, but you practice not all of them. When you learn a guitar song, you work on the first measure so you can play it perfectly 8 to 10 times. Then you add another measure, then you rewind and play measures 1 and 2. So you take like 1 or 2 a week and you just sort of, it's not meant to memorize the words. It's more like, okay, I kind of get the idea here and now I can make the words my own.
Makes sense. Cool, man. All right. So we're out of time. I mean, people know who you are. So if you want to plug yourself in, you can like,
do they know who I am?
They do. But
okay.
I'll put your link of your joshbraun.com there, or the direct link to the B2B, the Badass B2B Growth Guide. But if you want to plug yourself here, go for it.
No, it's okay. Yeah, joshbraun.com. You can see what I sell over there and more. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I know you and I have been connected for a long time, man. It's nice to finally have a conversation with you, man. I think we've known each other for, I want to say 2 or 3 years at least.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But we've never had a conversation. Isn't that a shame?
Yeah. I spoke to you once on the phone, but it was a random phone call. I texted you. I think I LinkedIn DM'd you once. I was like, I have a really weird question. And then I asked you the question. It was a personal question.
That's going to always, by the way, if you DM me and say I have a weird question, that's a red X. That is always going to get, let me hear it. Always.
But it was unintentional. So I didn't actually I wasn't using your like tactic. I was like, this is such a weird question.
Awesome. More. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, you bet.